Here's something that has wrecked me. 1% of pastors say that their church is very effective at evangelism. I mean, I don't know whether you caught that, but that basically means 99% of pastors admit that their church is not very effective at reaching unchurched people. And I think that means that evangelism is on life support. So I want to discuss 5 reasons that explains how we got here, because we can't fix what we don't understand. So let's go. You know, there's a statistic that every church leader should not only know, but be prepared to take action on. And the stat is that 1% of pastors say that their church is, quote, very effective at evangelism. So by inference, that means 99% of pastors have the courage of saying, you know what, we're not very good at this. And that represents a big decline from 2015, when 13% of pastors thought that their church was very effective at reaching the unchurched. I talked about this in my 2025 Church Trends report. And I think what this means is that evangelism right now is on life support in most American churches. And if you think about it, the demise of evangelism in Western churches is really like an existential problem in a world that desperately needs the gospel. I don't know that we've ever needed it more. The church seems to be really at a loss for how to reach the world. It's easy to point to growing churches to try to refute the stat. And you might say, well, you know, my church is growing. But you know what? As I outlined in my Church Trends report, at least 80% of church growth is actually transfer growth. So that's it. Some reports put it at 95%. So even if you're in a growing church, there's a very good chance that it's not true growth. You're just moving people from one church to another. So when you really look at it, at almost every count, the church's current efforts at evangelism, they're coming up short. So the question is why, right? So I travel around America, around the world, and I've had countless conversations with lead pastors. I read pretty widely on this subject. I'm always diving into new reports and stats. So what I want to share with you is 5 plausible reasons. These aren't non-negotiable, but see if they resonate, that evangelism is on life support in today's church. And hopefully you'll see some things that resonate with you and you can take action. So here's the first thing I'm thinking about, and that is that the culture wars have maybe created an us and them. Now, you probably noticed, guess what? There's a culture war going on, right? Cultural battles have abounded over the last few decades, and conservative groups with traditional values clash with progressive groups who advocate for social change. But what's happened is it's led not only to heated debates over society's direction, but to theology bleeding into ideology and ideology into theology. And even the term like an evangelical itself, and I would consider myself an evangelical, has morphed from a theological moniker, that would be me, to what's increasingly seen as an ideological and even political or partisan phrase. So a lot of church leaders have been vocally critical of their opponents in the culture wars. They've been critical of them politically and culturally. And in an America where a majority of the population no longer goes to church, here's what matters, okay? A lot of people are going to hear that criticism of their ideologies, of their beliefs, and of their lifestyles as criticism of them personally. So here's the problem. An us and them approach is going to kill any evangelical aspirations your church has when the people on the other side of your tirade are the very people you're supposed to be reaching. All right, the second thing that comes to mind is the world continues to reject self-righteous, hypocritical Christianity. And may I add, rightly so. Okay, there's a self-righteousness in church that's gained ascendancy in the last few decades, and many Christians, particularly conservative Christians, see themselves as morally superior to everyone else. So what's noticeably missing from a lot of public and private dialogue in Christianity today is the humility, the kindness, and the generosity that has characterized the best of Christian witness over the centuries. Jesus had a lot of issues with religious, self-righteous people, and apparently so do unchurched people. So the challenge with feeling superior to others is that it rightly draws the accusation of hypocrisy, right? If I'm like, oh, I'm so amazing, I never make mistakes, and I'm better than you, and then I screw up and I gossip or I make a mistake, right? Then I'm a hypocrite, right? And I mean, I am, and so are all of us, because none of us are who we think we are, and few of us are who we aspire to be. I would put myself in that category. So non-Christians rank this hypocrisy as a top objection to Christianity. So consider these stats for a minute. 30% of non-Christians cite suffering as a reason to object to Christianity. That's a lot, right? Almost a third of people are like, yep, I can't believe in a God who lets people suffer. But did you know that's 30%? 42% name hypocrisy as their objection. In other words, people are more concerned about Christian hypocrisy than they are about the theodicy, the problem of human suffering as a challenge to God. So that's the second reason. We're hypocrites. And I think if we own it and we confess it and we're humble about it, that's going to go a long way. The third reason that evangelism is on life support in the U.S. church is unchurched people feel judged, not loved by Christians. Underscoring all this is an apparent lack of love for the people who we're supposed to reach, right? We're trying to reach them, but we don't love them. We've already covered this, battle lines drawn in the culture wars and Christian hypocrisy and superiority. I think it's fair to ask out loud, where is the love gone? Like, consider how foreign, this gets me when I talk about it, all right? Most well-known Bible verse is John 3:16. And think about how foreign it is. If you were to say in Christian circles, not quoting it, God really loves the world. A lot of Christians would say, no, he doesn't. He hates the world. He condemns the world. We're supposed to be separate from the world. We're not supposed to be part of the world. And it's like, no, God loves the world enough that he gave his son. I don't know what to do with that. God actually loves the world. Yes, we're supposed to hate evil, but we're supposed to love the world. It seems relatively clear from the gospel that Jesus did, in fact, love the world enough to die for you, for me, for everybody, while we were still deeply estranged from him. We have a world that's estranged from Jesus, and guess what? He died for them, all right? That's the essence of the gospel, and he died because he loves them. So Christians today judge the world more than we love it, and judgment is a terrible evangelism strategy. It's very difficult to embrace and love people who judge and reject you. The fourth reason evangelism is on life support is that a lot of church leaders have settled for transfer growth as real growth. All right, like when you look at the stats, some very conservatively say 80% of church growth is transfer growth. Other studies push it to 95 to 97% of church growth is transfer growth. And further studies show that 3 to 5% of churches are growing primarily through conversion growth. So I just think we have to call an audible and say, you know what, that's not actual growth. Like, it's good that your church is thriving and succeeding and you're reaching people, but if it's just rebaptizing the people who are already baptized, I mean, that does have some value, but that's not really on mission. And if you've settled for transfer growth as good enough, have you abandoned the real mission of the church? And then the fifth and the final reason I'll discuss today is that church leaders have given up on a battle they're losing. Now, I really hope that this is not the case, but I fear it might be in some circles. So, if you play a game, you're always losing, whether it's a board game or a sport, what do? A lot of us, easy, we just start to play a different game. I'm not going to play football anymore. I'm not going to play hockey. I'm not going to play Monopoly. I always lose, right? So for decades now, church attendance has been declining, and a lot of churches have found themselves in decline. The mainline churches fell first, and now evangelical churches are going exactly the way that the mainline churches did a number of years ago. And sometimes we have language like, well, I'm not trying to grow, I'm just trying to be faithful. Well, I'm not really sure how faithful became the opposite of fruitful, but somehow it did. And if you're not hitting the target, what do? You pick another target. Well, that's not really what we're going for. We're not really trying to grow, right? The malaise has hit evangelical and non-denominational churches recently. And while it's less common to hear the, hey, we're not growing, we're just trying to be faithful line among evangelicals, you know what we do here? We hear evangelical leaders say, I'm just focused on discipleship. I want to make disciples. And listen, I'm all for discipleship. And over the last 5 years in particular, there have been a lot of evangelical churches who have focused on discipleship. All for it. That's fantastic. But I wonder if it's one of those things where you're focused on discipleship and you kind of chucked, I'm not saying you, but people have just chucked evangelism out the window, almost like a circle the wagons moment where it's like, we're just going to focus on making disciples here and we're going to ignore the world because we don't like the world anymore. We don't like where it's going. Well, God still loves the world. And I really believe that healthy churches have robust discipleship and robust evangelism. One without the other isn't really accomplishing our mission. You see, real discipleship doesn't happen when a Christian becomes a disciple. It happens when Christians make other disciples, right? I'm going to send you out to make disciples. So that implies evangelism. It's kind of like an infinite loop. If you have great evangelism, it leads to discipleship. Great discipleship leads back to evangelism. So if the recent focus on discipleship is just a smokescreen for giving up on an evangelism battle that the church was losing anyway, then, well, we got some serious work to do. So those are the 5 reasons that evangelism, in my view, may be on life support in the U.S. church as a whole. I'd love to know in the comments, which of the reasons resonates most with you? And most importantly, what do you think we can do about it?